The morning sun cast long shadows across Terminal 3 of Manchester International Airport as security guard Marcus Thompson adjusted his radio and checked his watch. It was barely 6:30 a.m., but the terminal was already buzzing with early morning travelers rushing to catch their flights. Marcus had been working airport security for 12 years, and he prided himself on being able to read people. Today felt different somehow, charged with an energy he couldn't quite place his finger on. Charlotte Williams sat nervously in the departure lounge, clutching her boarding pass for flight BA 2847 to Barcelona. The 28-year-old marketing executive had saved for months for this vacation, her first real break in 3 years. She kept glancing at her phone, checking the time obsessively. Her flight was scheduled to depart at 8:15 a.m., and everything seemed to be running on schedule. What she didn't know was that her carefully planned trip was about to become the center of an airport-wide security incident that would be talked about for years to come. William Patterson paced back and forth in the VIP lounge, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. As the CEO of Patterson Industries, a multinational consulting firm, William was accustomed to getting his way. His private jet had developed mechanical problems overnight, forcing him to book a last-minute seat on a commercial flight. The very thought of flying with regular passengers irritated him, but he had an important business meeting in Madrid that couldn't be postponed. His assistant had managed to secure him a first-class seat, but William was still fuming about the inconvenience. The first sign of trouble came at 7:45 a.m. when the departure board began showing delays. Flight after flight started displaying the dreaded yellow delayed status. Air traffic control had reported unusual weather patterns approaching from the west, and several flights were being held on the ground as a precautionary measure. Charlotte noticed the change immediately and felt her stomach drop. She had connecting flights to worry about, and any significant delay could ruin her entire itinerary. Marcus was stationed at Gate 12 when his radio crackled to life. "All units, we have a code yellow situation developing. Multiple flight delays due to weather. Expect increased passenger tension. Maintain heightened awareness." He acknowledged the message and surveyed the gate area. Already, he could see passengers becoming agitated, clustering around the departure screens and speaking in urgent, hushed tones to airline representatives. The gate agent for flight BA 2847 made the announcement that Charlotte had been dreading. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to adverse weather conditions, flight BA 2847 to Barcelona has been delayed by approximately 2 hours. We expect to begin boarding at 10:30 a.m. We apologize for any inconvenience." A collective groan rose from the waiting passengers, and Charlotte felt tears welling up in her eyes. Her connecting flight in Barcelona was scheduled to leave just 3 hours after her original arrival time. William heard the announcement from the VIP lounge and immediately stormed out, his face red with anger. He marched straight to the gate counter, pushing past other concerned passengers. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he shouted at the young gate agent, a 23-year-old named Sarah who had only been working for the airline for 6 months. "Do you have any idea who I am? I have a crucial meeting in Madrid, and I cannot afford these delays." Sarah tried her best to explain the situation calmly. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but the delay is due to safety concerns related to weather conditions. We're hoping to have an update within the hour." Her professional training kicked in, but she could feel her hands shaking slightly as William's voice grew louder and more demanding. "Safety concerns? This is ridiculous. I want to speak to your supervisor immediately." "No, I want to speak to the airport manager. This is costing me thousands of pounds every minute." William's voice carried across the gate area, and other passengers began to take notice. Some nodded in agreement with his frustration, while others seemed embarrassed by his public outburst. Marcus noticed the commotion and began walking toward Gate 12. In his experience, situations like this could escalate quickly, especially when delays were involved. He had seen mild-mannered businesspeople turn into raging monsters when their travel plans were disrupted. As he approached, he could hear William's voice growing more aggressive and demanding. Charlotte watched the scene unfold from her seat near the window. She felt sorry for the gate agent, who was clearly doing her best under difficult circumstances. At the same time, she couldn't help but share some of William's frustration, even if she would never express it so publicly. Her vacation was important to her, and the delay was threatening to derail everything she had worked so hard to plan. The situation at the gate counter continued to deteriorate as more passengers joined William in voicing their complaints. Sarah called for her supervisor, but it would take several minutes for management to arrive. The tension in the gate area was palpable, and Marcus could feel the mood of the crowd shifting from mild annoyance to genuine anger. William pulled out his phone and began making calls, speaking loudly about his connections and influence. "Get me the head of operations at British Airways," he barked into his phone. "Yes, this is William Patterson of Patterson Industries. I'm sitting in Manchester Airport being told I can't fly because of a few clouds." His conversation was punctuated by dramatic gestures and increasingly colorful language. Other passengers began to grow uncomfortable with William's behavior. An elderly couple sitting nearby moved to seats farther away, and a mother with young children gathered her belongings and relocated to a quieter part of the gate area. Charlotte remained in her seat, mesmerized by the unfolding drama but also increasingly worried about her own travel plans. Marcus positioned himself strategically near the gate counter, close enough to intervene if necessary but not so close as to appear confrontational. He had learned over the years that his mere presence often helped to de-escalate tense situations. His radio remained active, keeping him informed of similar scenes playing out at gates throughout the terminal. The gate supervisor, Jennifer Martinez, finally arrived to find William in the middle of a heated phone conversation while several other passengers looked on with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Jennifer had 15 years of experience in airline operations and had dealt with difficult passengers before, but she could immediately sense that this situation was different. William's agitation seemed to be reaching a boiling point. As the morning progressed, the weather situation worsened rather than improved. What had initially been reported as a brief weather delay was now looking like a prolonged ground stop that could last several hours. The airport's operations center was coordinating with air traffic control and meteorological services, but the news was not encouraging. A severe storm system was moving through the region, bringing with it dangerous wind shears and reduced visibility that made flying unsafe. The announcement of an extended delay came at 8:30 a.m., just 15 minutes before Flight BA 2847 was originally scheduled to depart. "Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you that Flight BA 2847 to Barcelona has been further delayed. Due to continuing adverse weather conditions, we do not expect to begin boarding until at least 1:30 p.m. We understand this is extremely frustrating and apologize for the inconvenience." The reaction was immediate and explosive. William slammed his phone down on the counter and began shouting at Jennifer with such force that spittle flew from his mouth. "This is absolutely inexcusable. I demand to be put on another flight immediately. I don't care if it's with another airline, I don't care what it costs. Fix this now." Charlotte finally stood up from her seat, her own frustration boiling over. She approached the counter, not to make demands like William, but to ask about rebooking options for her connecting flights. However, the scene at the counter was so chaotic that she couldn't get anyone's attention. William dominated the conversation, his voice drowning out anyone else who tried to speak. Marcus moved closer to the counter, his training telling him that the situation was about to cross a line. William's behavior was becoming increasingly aggressive, and other passengers were starting to look genuinely frightened. The security guard had seen this pattern before, frustration leading to anger, anger leading to threats, and threats leading to actions that no one wanted to see. The tipping point came when William grabbed Jennifer's arm as she turned to help another passenger. "Don't you dare walk away from me," he snarled. "I'm not finished talking to you." The physical contact crossed a clear boundary, and Marcus immediately stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to step back from the counter and lower your voice," Marcus said in a calm but authoritative tone. His years of experience had taught him that the key to de-escalation was to remain composed while establishing clear boundaries. "I understand you're frustrated, but we need to keep this civil." William turned his fury toward Marcus, his face now purple with rage. "Who do you think you are? I'm talking to airline personnel about a legitimate complaint. This is none of your business, security guard." The way he said security guard dripped with contempt, as if Marcus were somehow beneath his notice. "Actually, sir, maintaining order in the terminal is exactly my business," Marcus replied, his voice remaining steady despite William's obvious attempt to provoke him. "I'm asking you to step back from the counter and give the airline staff some space to do their job." The confrontation between William and Marcus drew the attention of everyone in the gate area. Passengers stopped their own conversations and activities to watch the drama unfold. Charlotte found herself holding her breath, unsure of what might happen next. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating. William took a step closer to Marcus, invading his personal space in an obvious attempt at intimidation. "I know people in this city, in this industry. I could have your job with one phone call. Don't test me." His voice had dropped to a menacing whisper, but, in the relative quiet of the gate area, everyone could hear every word. Marcus had faced down much more intimidating individuals than William Patterson. Gang members, drunk football hooligans, and genuinely dangerous criminals had all tried to intimidate him over the years. A middle-aged businessman in an expensive suit didn't even register on his scale of concerning threats. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to step back and calm down. If you continue with this behavior, I'll have to ask you to leave the gate area." Marcus's hand moved subtly toward his radio, a gesture that wasn't lost on William or the watching passengers. The standoff continued for what felt like hours but was actually only seconds. William's rage warred with his business sense. He knew that being ejected from the airport would definitely ruin his travel plans, but his anger and wounded pride made it difficult for him to back down gracefully. Charlotte watched the scene with growing alarm. What had started as an understandable frustration over flight delays had escalated into something much more serious. She could see that other passengers were becoming uncomfortable and even frightened by William's behavior. Some were gathering their belongings, as if preparing to move to a different part of the terminal. The situation reached its first crisis point when William made the mistake of reaching toward Marcus. Whether to grab him or simply to emphasize a point, no one would ever be sure. But Marcus's training and instincts kicked in immediately. He caught William's wrist in a firm grip and calmly said, "Sir, you need to keep your hands to yourself." The physical contact, however, brief and professional, sent William into an absolute fury. "Get your hands off me. This is assault. I want this man arrested immediately." His voice reached a pitch that could be heard throughout the terminal, drawing the attention of passengers at nearby gates and even airline staff from other counters. Marcus released William's wrist immediately but maintained his position between the angry businessman and the airline counter. "Sir, I barely touched you, and it was to prevent you from making physical contact with me. I strongly suggest you take a moment to calm down before this situation gets worse." But William was beyond reason now. The combination of the flight delay, his wounded pride, and what he perceived as disrespect from someone he considered beneath him had pushed him past his breaking point. He began shouting about lawyers and lawsuits, about getting everyone fired, about shutting down the airport if necessary. Jennifer, the gate supervisor, had been on her radio calling for additional support. Airport police were being dispatched to Gate 12, and senior security personnel were en route. She had also contacted the airline's crisis management team, who would handle the growing public relations nightmare that was unfolding in real time. Charlotte finally managed to catch Jennifer's attention during a brief lull in William's tirade. "Excuse me, I just need to know about rebooking my connecting flights," she said quietly, trying not to draw William's ire toward herself. "Ma'am, I'll be with you in just a moment," Jennifer replied, her voice strained from dealing with the ongoing crisis. "We're going to get everyone sorted out, I promise." But William overheard the exchange and turned his attention toward Charlotte. "Oh, so now you're helping other passengers while ignoring me? This is discrimination. I was here first, and I demand immediate service." Marcus stepped slightly closer to William, subtly positioning himself between the angry man and Charlotte. He could see that William's rage was becoming more generalized, potentially threatening other innocent passengers who were simply trying to manage their own travel disruptions. The gate area had become a powder keg, with William at the center of an increasingly volatile situation. Other passengers were recording the incident on their phones, ensuring that whatever happened next would likely end up on social media within hours. The pressure was building toward an explosion that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. As Marcus maintained his vigilant watch and William continued his increasingly erratic behavior, Charlotte retreated to her original seat, clutching her boarding pass and wondering how a simple vacation flight had turned into such a nightmare. The storm outside was nothing compared to the human tempest that was brewing inside Terminal 3, and the morning was still young. The arrival of airport police officers Sarah Mitchell and James Rodriguez at 9:15 a.m. marked a significant escalation in what had started as a simple flight delay complaint. Both officers had received the call about a disruptive passenger situation at Gate 12, but nothing had prepared them for the scene they encountered. William Patterson stood in the center of a growing circle of onlookers, his voice hoarse from shouting, his expensive business suit wrinkled and disheveled from his animated gesturing. Marcus felt a wave of relief when he saw his colleagues approaching. While he was confident in his ability to handle William alone, the situation had been slowly building pressure like a volcano ready to erupt. The presence of additional authority figures might help convince the businessman to reconsider his approach. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Mitchell asked, her voice carrying the calm authority that came from 5 years of dealing with airport incidents. She had seen everything from drunk passengers trying to board flights to international fugitives attempting to flee the country, but domestic disputes over flight delays were actually among the most challenging because they involved otherwise law-abiding citizens who had simply reached their breaking point. William immediately seized upon the arrival of the police as vindication of his position. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. I want to press charges against the security guard for assault and false imprisonment. He physically grabbed me when I was simply trying to get information about my delayed flight. I have witnesses." Marcus shook his head calmly. "Officers, Mr. Patterson became increasingly agitated about the flight delay and began making physical gestures toward airline staff. When he reached toward me, I briefly restrained his wrist to prevent any physical contact. I released him immediately and asked him to step back." Officer Rodriguez looked around at the assembled passengers, many of whom were still recording the incident on their phones. "Did anyone here witness what happened?" Several hands went up, and he began taking informal statements from the bystanders. Charlotte found herself reluctantly drawn into the situation when Officer Rodriguez approached her seat. "Ma'am, did you see what happened between these two gentlemen?" She glanced nervously at William, who was watching her intently, and then at Marcus, who simply nodded encouragingly. "I saw the security guard ask the gentleman to step back from the counter several times," Charlotte said carefully. "The gentleman seemed very angry about the flight delay, and he was yelling at the airline staff. When he reached toward the security guard, that's when the guard grabbed his wrist, but it was very brief." William's face contorted with rage at Charlotte's account. "That's not what happened at all. This is conspiracy. They're all covering for each other." His voice rose to such a pitch that other passengers at nearby gates began looking in their direction. Officer Mitchell recognized the signs of someone who had completely lost perspective on their situation. In her experience, successful businesspeople were often the worst passengers when things didn't go their way because they were accustomed to controlling their environment. When faced with situations beyond their control, like weather delays, they sometimes had complete emotional breakdowns. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice and speak calmly," Officer Mitchell said to William. "We're going to sort this out, but I need you to cooperate with me." Instead of complying, William launched into a lengthy tirade about his importance, his connections, and his rights as a paying customer. He demanded to speak to the airport manager, the police chief, and his lawyer all at once. His behavior was becoming so erratic that even the passengers who had initially sympathized with his frustration over the delay were beginning to back away. Meanwhile, Jennifer Martinez was dealing with the fallout from the incident spreading to other passengers. The 2-hour delay had already been extended to at least 4 hours, and now the dramatic scene at the gate was making everyone nervous about their own travel plans. She had managed to rebook several passengers onto other flights, but the options were limited due to the weather affecting multiple airports. Marcus remained positioned near William, ready to intervene if the situation escalated further. He had noticed that William's behavior seemed to be getting more erratic rather than calming down. In his experience, This was often a sign that someone was having some kind of breakdown rather than simply being angry about a delay. The situation took another turn for the worse when William suddenly declared that he was going to find his own way to Spain. "I don't need this airline, and I don't need this airport. I'll charter my own flight, or drive to another airport, or take the ferry to France. You people have no idea who you're dealing with." Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir, if you're planning to leave, that's your choice, but you can't disrupt other passengers while you're here. I need you to either calm down or we'll have to ask you to leave the terminal." This threat seemed to push William over an invisible line. He began shouting about his rights, about discrimination, about how he was being treated unfairly because of his success. His behavior was becoming increasingly disconnected from reality, and Officer Mitchell began to worry that they might be dealing with someone having a genuine psychological crisis rather than just a spoiled businessman. Charlotte watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of fascination and horror. She had called her hotel in Barcelona to explain the delay, and they had been understanding about holding her reservation. But now she was beginning to worry that the situation might affect all passengers on the flight, possibly leading to additional delays or even cancellation. At 10:30 a.m., just as the flight had originally been scheduled to board, William made a decision that would change everything. Despite the presence of 2 police officers and Marcus, he suddenly pushed past Officer Rodriguez and began walking rapidly toward the departure gate, as if he intended to board the aircraft whether it was ready or not. "Sir, stop right there," Officer Mitchell called out. "You cannot proceed to the gate without clearance from airline personnel." But William ignored her completely, his mind apparently set on some private mission to force his way onto the delayed flight. Marcus reacted immediately, moving to intercept William before he could reach the restricted gate area. This was exactly the kind of security breach that could trigger airport-wide alerts and potentially shut down operations entirely. No unauthorized person could be allowed to approach aircraft, regardless of their frustration level. The physical confrontation that followed would later be analyzed frame by frame in security footage and witness statements. William, seeing Marcus approaching to stop him, suddenly swung his briefcase in a wide arc, clearly intending to strike the security guard. Marcus ducked under the swing and grabbed William's arm, using the businessman's own momentum to spin him around and pin him against the wall. "Let me go! Let me go right now!" William screamed, struggling against Marcus's hold. "I have a right to board my flight. This is kidnapping. This is assault. Someone call the police." "Sir, we are the police," Officer Rodriguez said dryly as he approached to assist Marcus. "And you just attempted to assault a security officer and breach airport security. You're under arrest." The reading of Miranda rights to William Patterson in the middle of Gate 12 drew an even larger crowd of onlookers. Passengers from other gates began gathering to watch the spectacle, and airport staff members who weren't directly involved found excuses to walk past and observe the incident. Charlotte felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety as she watched William being handcuffed. On one hand, his disruptive behavior had been making everyone in the gate area uncomfortable, and his removal would certainly calm the situation. On the other hand, she couldn't help but worry about what this incident might mean for their flight, which was already severely delayed. As William was being led away, still shouting about lawsuits and discrimination, he suddenly stopped and turned back toward the gate area. "Charlotte," he yelled, apparently having remembered her name from her earlier conversation with the gate agent. "Charlotte, you saw what happened. Tell them this is all a setup. Tell them I was just trying to get to my flight." Charlotte shrank back in her seat, horrified that William was trying to drag her into his legal troubles. She had no idea how he even knew her name, and she certainly didn't want any part of whatever consequences might follow from his behavior. Marcus, breathing slightly heavy from the physical altercation, straightened his uniform and checked his radio. "Control, this is Thompson at Gate 12. We have one male passenger in custody for assault and attempted security breach. Situation is now under control, but recommend elevated security status for the remainder of the delay." The aftermath of William's arrest created its own set of problems. Jennifer Martinez now had to deal with dozens of passengers who were asking questions about what had happened, whether it would affect their flight, and whether they were safe to continue traveling. The incident had transformed a simple weather delay into a complex security situation. Officer Mitchell remained at the gate to take additional witness statements and complete the paperwork for William's arrest. She spoke with Charlotte again, along with several other passengers who had witnessed the incident. The elderly couple who had moved away early in the confrontation provided a particularly clear account of how William's behavior had escalated over time. "I've been flying for 40 years, the elderly gentleman told Officer Mitchell, and I've never seen anything like that. The young man just lost his mind completely. Started normal enough, complaining about the delay like everyone else, but then something just snapped in him." The ripple effects of the incident began spreading throughout the airport. Security footage from Gate 12 was being reviewed by airport officials, and word of the arrest was being reported up the chain of command. William Patterson's behavior had not only disrupted his own travel plans but had created a security incident that would require investigation and reporting to aviation authorities. Charlotte finally managed to speak with Jennifer about her connecting flights. The gate supervisor, despite the stress of the morning's events, was sympathetic and helpful. She managed to rebook Charlotte on a later connection in Barcelona and even secured her a complimentary meal voucher for the extended delay. "I'm so sorry you had to witness all of that," Jennifer said to Charlotte. "That kind of behavior is extremely rare, and we appreciate your patience during this difficult situation." As the morning progressed toward noon, the gate area slowly returned to a more normal atmosphere. The weather delay remained in effect, but without William's disruptive presence, passengers were able to settle into the routine of waiting. Some read books, others worked on laptops, and a few managed to nap in the uncomfortable airport chairs. Marcus completed his incident report and prepared to resume his normal duties. However, the airport duty manager had requested that he remain at Gate 12 for the remainder of the delay, in case any other passengers became agitated about the extended wait time. The news of William's arrest began to spread beyond the airport through social media. Several passengers had posted videos of the incident online, and local news outlets were picking up the story. By noon, #AirportMeltdown was trending on Twitter, with hundreds of people sharing their own stories of airline delays and passenger misbehavior. Charlotte checked her phone and was surprised to see that one of the videos clearly showed her in the background during William's arrest. She had become an unwitting participant in what was clearly going to be a viral news story. The thought made her uncomfortable, and she made a mental note to be more careful about her privacy settings on social media. The weather situation finally began to improve around 1 p.m., with air traffic control reporting that wind conditions were becoming more stable. However, the incident with William had created additional delays as airport security conducted enhanced screening procedures for all passengers on the affected flights. As boarding time approached, Charlotte reflected on the morning's events. What had started as a simple vacation trip had turned into a front-row seat to human behavior at its worst. She had witnessed how quickly frustration could turn to rage, and how one person's inability to cope with disappointment could affect dozens of innocent bystanders. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to announce that Flight BA 2847 to Barcelona is now ready for boarding. We will begin with first class and premium passengers, followed by general boarding." Charlotte gathered her belongings, relieved that her journey could finally continue. But, as she looked around the gate area, she noticed that several seats remained empty. The incident with William had convinced some passengers to rebook on different flights or even cancel their trips entirely. The ripple effects of one man's breakdown would continue long after he was forgotten in his jail cell. The Manchester City Police Station on Bootle Street had processed thousands of arrests over the years, but Detective Inspector Rebecca Walsh had rarely encountered a suspect quite like William Patterson. Sitting in interview room 3 at 2:30 p.m., still wearing his wrinkled business suit and scowling at everyone who entered, William presented a study in contrasts. His expensive watch and gold cufflinks spoke of wealth and success, but his disheveled appearance and the remnants of spittle on his chin told a different story entirely. "Mr. Patterson," Detective Inspector Walsh began, settling into the chair across from him, "you've been arrested on charges of assault, attempted security breach, and disturbing the peace. Do you understand these charges?" William's response was immediate and explosive. "This is all a massive misunderstanding. I'm the victim here. That security guard assaulted me, and those police officers violated my rights. I want to speak to my lawyer immediately, and I want to press countercharges against everyone involved. Detective Inspector Walsh had seen this type of reaction before, usually from individuals who were accustomed to being in control and couldn't process being on the wrong side of the law. In her 15 years of police work, she had learned that successful businesspeople often made the worst suspects because they couldn't accept that money and influence couldn't make legal problems disappear. Meanwhile, back at the airport, the aftermath of William's arrest was still unfolding in ways that no one had anticipated. Marcus Thompson found himself fielding questions from airport management, airline executives, and even reporters who had gotten wind of the story through social media. The incident had escalated far beyond a simple passenger disturbance. "Marcus, we need you to walk us through exactly what happened," said Airport Security Director Linda Harrison. She had been called in from her day off to handle the crisis, and the situation was more complicated than anyone had initially realized. William Patterson wasn't just any disgruntled passenger, he was the CEO of a company that had significant business relationships with several major airlines. The conference room at Manchester Airport was filled with people trying to understand how a simple flight delay had turned into a public relations nightmare. Representatives from British Airways, airport management, and legal counsel were all present, reviewing security footage and witness statements. Charlotte Williams was finally aboard Flight BA 2847, but her relief at leaving the chaos behind was tempered by the knowledge that she would likely be called upon to provide additional witness testimony. Officer Mitchell had taken her contact information and explained that she might be needed for court proceedings. What was supposed to be a simple vacation had become entangled in legal complications she never could have imagined. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Charlotte looked out her window and could see news vans arriving at the airport. The story had grown beyond local interest and was now being covered by national media outlets. She pulled out her phone and was shocked to see that videos of the incident had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times in just a few hours. Back in the police station, William's lawyer, Jonathan Blackwood of Blackwood & Associates, arrived at 3:45 p.m. looking harried and concerned. As one of Manchester's most prominent criminal defense attorneys, he was accustomed to handling high-profile cases, but William's situation presented unique challenges. "Jonathan, thank God you're here," Williams said as his lawyer entered the interview room. "This is all a terrible mistake. I was simply trying to get information about my delayed flight, and these people turned it into some kind of federal case. We need to get me out of here immediately." Blackwood reviewed the charges and the preliminary evidence with growing concern. The security footage was damning, showing William clearly swinging his briefcase at Marcus and attempting to breach the security perimeter. Even more problematic were the dozens of witness statements, all of which painted a consistent picture of William's escalating aggressive behavior. "William, I need you to be completely honest with me," Blackwood said carefully. "Had you been drinking this morning? Are you taking any medications? Is there anything that might explain your behavior beyond simple frustration with the flight delay?" The question seemed to catch William off guard. He had been operating under the assumption that his behavior was entirely reasonable and justified, but his lawyer's tone suggested otherwise. "I had a coffee and maybe a brandy in the VIP lounge while I was waiting, but I wasn't drunk. I was just trying to get to an important business meeting." Detective Inspector Walsh observed the consultation between William and his lawyer through the one-way glass, making notes about William's demeanor and responses. In her experience, suspects who maintained their innocence in the face of overwhelming evidence often had deeper psychological issues that needed to be addressed. The media attention surrounding the incident was growing by the hour. The hashtag airport meltdown had evolved into a broader discussion about passenger rights, airline customer service, and acceptable behavior in public spaces. Talk show hosts were debating the incident, and opinion pieces were being written about entitled behavior and class privilege. Marcus Thompson found himself at the center of unwanted attention when a local news crew tracked him down for an interview. Standing outside his modest home in Salford, he tried to explain what had happened without sensationalizing the incident. "I was just doing my job," Marcus told the reporter. "When someone becomes aggressive and potentially dangerous, we have procedures to follow. This wasn't about targeting anyone personally, it was about maintaining safety and security for all the passengers. The interview would later be praised for Marcus's professionalism and restraint, but it also highlighted the class dynamics at play in the incident. Here was a working-class security guard who had maintained his composure and followed proper procedures, while a wealthy CEO had completely lost control and ended up in jail. Charlotte's flight to Barcelona was smooth, but she spent most of the journey thinking about the morning's events. She had witnessed something that revealed uncomfortable truths about human nature and social dynamics. The incident had also made her realize how quickly normal situations could spiral out of control, and how innocent bystanders could become unwillingly involved in other people's drama. When she arrived in Barcelona, Charlotte discovered that her brief appearance in the viral videos had made her something of a minor celebrity. Friends were texting her links to news articles that mentioned the woman in the blue sweater who witnessed the entire incident. She hadn't realized how visible she had been during the chaos at Gate 12. Back in Manchester, William's business empire was beginning to feel the impact of his arrest. Patterson Industries' board of directors called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation and its potential impact on the company's reputation. The firm's stock price had already dropped by 3%, and several clients were expressing concern about their associations with the company. "We need to address this immediately," said board member Margaret Stevenson. "William's behavior has created a public relations disaster that could affect all of our business relationships. We need to consider our options very carefully." The board's discussion centered on whether William's behavior represented an isolated incident brought on by stress and unfortunate circumstances, or whether it revealed character flaws that made him unsuitable for continued leadership of the company. The security footage, which had been leaked to several news outlets, showed behavior that was difficult to explain or excuse. William's wife, Patricia, arrived at the police station at 5:30 p.m., looking devastated and confused. She had learned about her husband's arrest from a phone call from his assistant, and she couldn't understand how a simple business trip had led to criminal charges. "I don't understand what happened," Patricia told Jonathan Blackwood. "William has been under a lot of stress with work lately, but I never imagined anything like this. He's not a violent person, he's never even raised his voice at home." Blackwood was beginning to piece together a picture of a man who had been dealing with increasing pressure and stress, possibly exacerbated by underlying mental health issues. William's behavior at the airport seemed to represent a complete break from his normal personality, which could be significant both legally and personally. The psychological evaluation that was ordered as part of the arrest process revealed some troubling patterns. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, no relation to the police officer, noted signs of possible depression, anxiety, and what appeared to be early stages of stress-related breakdown. Mr. Patterson appears to have been functioning at a high level professionally while dealing with significant internal pressure, Dr. Mitchell wrote in her preliminary report. The incident at the airport may represent a psychological break triggered by circumstances beyond his control. Meanwhile, the airline industry was grappling with broader questions raised by the incident. Flight delays were a common occurrence, and passenger frustration was an ongoing challenge. The William Patterson case had highlighted the need for better training in de-escalation techniques and more effective communication during disruptions. Jennifer Martinez, the gate supervisor who had borne the brunt of William's initial anger, found herself being interviewed by airline management about her handling of the situation. While her supervisors were generally supportive, the incident had raised questions about security procedures and staff training. "I followed all of our protocols," Jennifer explained to her manager. "But nothing really prepares you for someone who becomes completely irrational. I kept trying to de-escalate, but he seemed to get angrier no matter what I said." The ripple effects of the incident continued to spread through various professional networks. William's scheduled business meeting in Madrid had to be cancelled, affecting negotiations for a multi-million-pound contract. His absence and the negative publicity surrounding his arrest had immediate business consequences that extended far beyond the airport. As evening approached, William remained in custody pending a bail hearing scheduled for the following morning. His cell was a far cry from the luxury hotel rooms he was accustomed to, and the reality of his situation was finally beginning to sink in. The man who had been shouting about his importance and connections just hours earlier was now facing the prospect of criminal conviction and professional ruin. The psychological impact on all the participants was becoming clearer as the day wore on. Charlotte found herself unable to enjoy her first evening in Barcelona, instead obsessing over the morning's events and wondering if she could have done anything differently. Marcus went home to his family but found it difficult to relax, knowing that his actions would be scrutinized and analyzed in the coming weeks. The incident had also affected other passengers who had witnessed the confrontation. Several people posted on social media about feeling anxious during their subsequent flights, and a few had sought counseling to process what they had experienced. The trauma of witnessing such extreme behavior had lasting effects that extended far beyond the immediate participants. As night fell over Manchester, the story of the airport meltdown was still developing. News outlets were preparing follow-up stories about air rage, mental health, and corporate responsibility. Legal experts were speculating about potential outcomes for William's case, while crisis management specialists were analyzing the reputational damage to his business empire. The incident had become a case study in how quickly modern life could unravel, how stress and entitlement could lead to destructive behavior, and how individual actions could have far-reaching consequences in an interconnected world. What had started as a simple flight delay had become a complex web of legal, professional, and personal ramifications that would take months to fully resolve. 3 weeks after the incident at Manchester Airport, the full scope of William Patterson's fall from grace was becoming apparent to everyone in his circle. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-pound deals was now sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell's psychiatric practice, mandated by the court to undergo mental health evaluation and treatment as part of his bail conditions. The bail hearing had been a humbling experience for William. Standing before Magistrate Judge Henry Morrison, he had been forced to listen as the prosecution outlined his charges and played excerpts from the airport security footage. His lawyer, Jonathan Blackwood, had managed to secure his release on £50,000 bail, but the conditions were strict: no contact with airport personnel involved in the incident, mandatory psychiatric evaluation, and surrender of his passport pending trial. "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Hartwell began during their first session, "I want you to help me understand what was happening in your life leading up to the incident at the airport. What kind of pressures were you dealing with?" William shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair. 3 weeks of media scrutiny, business losses, and social isolation had begun to crack his carefully constructed facade of confidence and control. "I suppose I had been under some stress," he admitted reluctantly. "Business has been challenging lately, and I've been working 18-hour days trying to keep everything together." The truth was far more complicated than William was initially willing to admit. Patterson Industries had been struggling for months with a series of bad investments and client losses. William had been using increasingly desperate measures to maintain the appearance of success, including taking out personal loans to cover business expenses and lying to his board of directors about the company's financial health. Meanwhile, Charlotte Williams was discovering that her brief moment in the spotlight had unexpected consequences. The viral videos from the airport had been seen by millions of people worldwide, and her face had become recognizable enough that strangers occasionally approached her on the street. Most interactions were positive. People wanted to commend her for remaining calm during the chaos, but the attention was overwhelming for someone who had simply been trying to take a vacation. "I never asked to be part of this story," Charlotte told her best friend Sarah during a phone call from her hotel in Barcelona. "I was just trying to get to Spain for a holiday, and somehow I ended up as a witness in what's becoming a major legal case." The legal implications of William's arrest were indeed becoming more serious than anyone had initially anticipated. The Crown Prosecution Service had decided to pursue all charges, including the assault on Marcus Thompson and the attempted security breach. If convicted on all counts, William could face up to 2 years in prison and substantial fines. More immediately damaging was the impact on his business empire. The board of directors at Patterson Industries had voted to suspend William from all duties pending the resolution of his legal troubles. His assistant, Margaret Singh, had been handling media inquiries and trying to manage the company's operations in his absence, but clients were increasingly nervous about their associations with the firm. "We've lost 3 major accounts this week alone," Margaret reported to the emergency board meeting. The Henderson Group specifically cited the negative publicity surrounding Mr. Patterson's arrest as their reason for terminating our contract. "Our reputation in the industry is being severely damaged. The financial impact was staggering. Patterson Industries' stock price had plummeted by 40% since the airport incident, wiping out millions in shareholder value. Several pending deals had been cancelled or postponed, and the company's credit rating was under review by major financial institutions. Marcus Thompson, meanwhile, was dealing with his own set of challenges. While he had been cleared of any wrongdoing by airport authorities and praised by his supervisors for his professional handling of the situation, the intense media attention had made his job more difficult. Every day brought new security challenges as people recognized him from the news coverage. "I never expected this kind of attention," Marcus confided to his wife Linda over dinner. "I've been doing this job for 12 years without anyone knowing my name, and now I'm being called a hero just for doing what I was trained to do." The hero label had come from several quarters. Union representatives had used Marcus's case to highlight the dangers faced by security personnel and the importance of supporting workers who stand up to aggressive behavior. Community leaders had praised his calm professionalism in the face of what many saw as entitled, privileged aggression. The incident had indeed sparked broader conversations about class dynamics, mental health, and acceptable behavior in public spaces. Social media was filled with stories from service workers who had faced similar abuse from customers, and the #StandWithMarcus had gained traction as a symbol of support for working-class people dealing with entitled behavior. Dr. Hartwell's sessions with William were beginning to reveal the deeper psychological issues that had contributed to his breakdown. Years of suppressing anxiety and depression while maintaining a facade of success had created enormous internal pressure. The flight delay had simply been the trigger that released years of accumulated stress and frustration. "I think I've been angry for a very long time," William admitted during his third session. "Angry at clients, angry at competitors, angry at circumstances I couldn't control. I just never let myself acknowledge it because I thought successful people weren't supposed to feel that way." The psychiatrist nodded, making notes about William's growing self-awareness. "What do you think might have happened differently if you had addressed these feelings before they reached a crisis point?" William considered the question carefully. The past few weeks had given him more time for reflection than he'd had in years. "I probably would have been able to handle the flight delay like a normal person. Maybe I would have been frustrated, but I wouldn't have lost complete control of myself." The legal proceedings were moving forward despite William's growing understanding of his psychological state. The Crown Prosecution Service had assembled a strong case based on multiple witness statements, security footage, and police reports. Jonathan Blackwood was preparing a defense strategy that would focus on William's mental state and lack of prior criminal history, but even he was pessimistic about the outcome. "The evidence against you is overwhelming," Blackwood told William during a meeting at his law office. "Our best hope is to negotiate a plea agreement that includes community service and continued psychiatric treatment. A trial would likely result in jail time, and the additional publicity wouldn't help your business or personal relationships." William's wife Patricia had been struggling with her own emotional responses to the incident. The man she had married 30 years ago seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. The public humiliation had affected their social circle, and several longtime friends had distanced themselves from the family. "I keep watching those videos online, trying to understand what happened to my husband," Patricia told her sister during a difficult conversation. "That person screaming and trying to hit people, that's not the William the first no. Something was seriously wrong, and I didn't see the signs." The psychological evaluation ordered by the court was revealing additional concerning patterns. Dr. Rebecca Foster, the court-appointed psychiatrist, diagnosed William with severe anxiety disorder and depression, possibly exacerbated by substance abuse issues that hadn't been previously acknowledged. "Mr. Patterson has been self-medicating with alcohol for several years," Dr. Foster reported to the court. Combined with the extreme stress of his business situation and his untreated mental health issues, this created conditions that made an explosive incident almost inevitable. The substance abuse revelation came as a shock to William's family and colleagues. He had always been seen as someone who had complete control over every aspect of his life. The idea that he had been struggling with alcohol dependency while maintaining his professional responsibilities was difficult for people to process. Charlotte Williams had returned from her vacation in Spain, but the experience had been overshadowed by constant reminders of the airport incident. News outlets had tracked down her hotel information and attempted to interview her about her witness testimony. She had declined all media requests, but the attention had made it impossible to enjoy what was supposed to be a relaxing holiday. "I feel like I'm being punished for being in the wrong place at the wrong time," Charlotte complained to her employer when she returned to work. "I didn't do anything wrong, but somehow I'm part of this story that won't go away." Her company, a mid-sized marketing firm, had been supportive of her situation and had even offered to help with legal expenses if her testimony was needed for the trial. However, Charlotte was beginning to realize that her involvement in the case might have longer-term implications for her privacy and professional life. The aviation industry was also grappling with the broader implications of the incident. Manchester Airport had implemented new protocols for dealing with disruptive passengers, including enhanced training for gate agents and security personnel. Other airports were reviewing their own procedures and considering similar measures. "The Patterson incident has highlighted gaps in our de-escalation procedures," admitted Airport Operations Director Michael Chen during a staff meeting. "We need to be better prepared for passengers who are dealing with mental health crises, not just traditional security threats." The incident had also prompted discussions within the airline industry about customer service during disruptions. British Airways had conducted a comprehensive review of their delay management procedures, with particular attention to identifying passengers who might be at risk of emotional breakdown. Jennifer Martinez, the gate agent who had borne the initial brunt of William's anger, had been promoted to supervisor as recognition of her professional handling of the situation. However, the experience had left her more cautious and sometimes anxious when dealing with upset passengers. "I find myself watching for warning signs now," Jennifer explained to her new trainee agents. "Most passengers handle delays reasonably well, even when they're frustrated. But sometimes you can see someone building toward a breaking point, and that's when we need to be extra careful about our approach." The media attention surrounding the case continued to evolve and expand. What had started as a simple news story about air rage had become a broader cultural discussion about mental health, class privilege, and social behavior. Academic researchers were analyzing the incident as a case study in public psychology and crisis management. Professor Janet Richardson of Manchester University's Psychology Department had been following the case closely. "The Patterson incident represents a perfect storm of psychological, social, and situational factors," she wrote in a journal article about the case. "It demonstrates how quickly normal social functioning can break down when multiple stressors converge." As the weeks passed, the various participants in the drama were all dealing with their own versions of aftermath. William was slowly coming to terms with the destruction of his carefully constructed life, while beginning to address the underlying issues that had led to his breakdown. Marcus was adjusting to unwanted fame while continuing to do his job with characteristic professionalism. Charlotte was trying to return to normal life while knowing that her moment of public visibility had changed her in ways she was still discovering. The story was far from over, with a trial date still to be set and ongoing investigations into William's business practices. But already, the incident had served as a catalyst for important conversations about mental health, workplace stress, and the way society treats both service workers and those who abuse their positions of privilege. The ripple effects of one man's airport meltdown were continuing to spread in directions that none of the original participants could have anticipated. 6 months after the incident that had made him infamous across the internet, William Patterson stood before Judge Margaret Thompson in Manchester Crown Court, a changed man in every sense of the word. Gone was the expensive business suit and arrogant demeanor that had characterized his airport meltdown. Instead, he wore a simple navy blazer and carried himself with the humble posture of someone who had been forced to confront the worst aspects of his character. The courtroom was packed with journalists, observers, and the key figures from that chaotic morning at Gate 12. Marcus Thompson sat in the gallery, having been excused from work to attend the sentencing hearing. Charlotte Williams had flown back from her new job in Edinburgh, where she had relocated partly to escape the ongoing media attention. Her testimony during the trial had been crucial in establishing the timeline of events and William's escalating behavior. "Your Honor," Jonathan Blackwood addressed the court, "my client stands before you today as a man who has undergone profound personal transformation. The incident at Manchester Airport was the culmination of years of untreated mental health issues, substance abuse, and professional stress that had reached a breaking point. Judge Thompson reviewed the extensive psychiatric reports, character references, and evidence of Williams' rehabilitation efforts over the past 6 months. The man who had once commanded a business empire had spent the time in intensive therapy, attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and volunteering at a homeless shelter, work that had begun as court-ordered community service but had evolved into something more meaningful. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell had submitted a comprehensive report detailing Williams' progress in treatment. Mr. Patterson has demonstrated remarkable insight into the psychological factors that led to his breakdown, she had written. He has been compliant with all treatment recommendations and has shown genuine remorse for his actions and their impact on others. The impact on others had been substantial and far-reaching. Patterson Industries had been forced into administration 3 months after Williams' arrest, when it became clear that the company's financial problems were more severe than anyone had realized. The investigation into his business practices had revealed a pattern of risky investments and poor financial management that had predated his airport incident by several years. 237 people lost their jobs when Patterson Industries collapsed, prosecutor Helen Richards reminded the court. While Mr. Patterson's mental health issues may explain his behavior, they cannot excuse the broader pattern of irresponsibility that affected so many innocent employees and their families. Margaret Singh, Williams' former assistant, was among those who had lost their livelihoods due to the company's collapse. She had found new employment as an office manager for a small consulting firm, but at a significant reduction in salary. Like many of the Patterson Industries employees, she had mixed feelings about her former boss's transformation. "I'm glad he's getting help for his problems," Margaret told a reporter outside the courthouse. "But it's hard to forget that his breakdown destroyed the careers of people who had nothing to do with his personal issues. We're all still dealing with the consequences of his inability to cope with stress." Charlotte Williams had undergone her own transformation in the months following the incident. The unwanted notoriety had prompted her to reassess her career goals and personal priorities. She had left her marketing job in Manchester and moved to Edinburgh, where she was working for a non-profit organization focused on mental health awareness, a career change directly inspired by her involvement in the Patterson case. "Witnessing what happened to Mr. Patterson made me realize how fragile people's mental health can be," Charlotte explained to the court during her victim impact statement. "His behavior that morning was frightening and disruptive, but I've come to understand that it was also a cry for help from someone who was drowning in his own psychological pain." Marcus Thompson had also been affected by the prolonged attention surrounding the case. While his handling of the incident had been universally praised, the constant media scrutiny had made his job more challenging. He had received numerous job offers from private security companies and other airports, but had chosen to remain at Manchester Airport, where he had been promoted to senior security officer. Mr. Patterson's behavior that morning put passengers and staff at risk, Marcus stated in his impact testimony. "But I've seen the work he's done since then, and I believe people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of addressing their problems." The reference to Williams' post-incident work was significant. Beyond his required community service, he had become an advocate for mental health awareness in the business community. Using his experience as a cautionary tale, he had spoken at corporate seminars and business schools about the dangers of untreated stress and the importance of work-life balance. His wife Patricia had filed for divorce 4 months after his arrest, unable to cope with the public humiliation and the revelation of problems in their marriage that she had been ignoring for years. However, their separation had been amicable, and Patricia had provided a character reference for the court proceedings. "William is not a bad man," Patricia's statement read. "He's a man who lost his way under enormous pressure and made terrible decisions as a result. The person who had that breakdown at the airport was someone I didn't recognize, but the person he's becoming through treatment is closer to the man I originally married 30 years ago." The psychiatric evaluation conducted for the court had revealed the full extent of Williams' psychological issues. Years of high-stress business situations, combined with his perfectionist personality and reluctance to seek help, had created a perfect storm of mental health problems. The alcohol abuse that had been uncovered during treatment had been his way of self-medicating anxiety and depression that dated back to his early career. Mr. Patterson presents a classic case of high-functioning mental illness, Dr. Rebecca Foster told the court. He was able to maintain professional success for years while struggling with serious psychological issues. The airport incident was essentially a psychological emergency that had been building for a very long time. Judge Thompson had presided over many cases involving mental health issues, but the Patterson case was unusual in its complexity and public visibility. The intersection of mental health, criminal behavior, and social media attention had created challenges for everyone involved in the legal process. This case has highlighted important questions about how our society deals with mental health crises and the responsibilities of individuals to seek help before their problems affect others, Judge Thompson observed. Mr. Patterson's behavior that morning was inexcusable, but his efforts at rehabilitation have been exemplary. The sentence, when it came, reflected both the seriousness of William's actions and his genuine efforts at rehabilitation. Judge Thompson sentenced him to 18 months in prison, suspended for 2 years, with requirements for continued psychiatric treatment and 200 hours of community service focused on mental health advocacy. Mr. Patterson, your behavior at Manchester Airport was dangerous, disruptive, and completely unacceptable, Judge Thompson stated. However, the evidence shows that you have taken responsibility for your actions and made genuine efforts to address the underlying issues that led to your breakdown. This suspended sentence reflects both the gravity of your offense and your commitment to rehabilitation. The suspended sentence meant that William would avoid immediate imprisonment but would face jail time if he committed any further offenses. The conditions of his sentence included regular check-ins with probation officers, continued therapy, and restrictions on his travel and business activities. Outside the courthouse, William faced a small crowd of reporters and photographers. 6 months earlier, he would have pushed past them angrily or made demands about his privacy. Instead, he stopped and made a brief, prepared statement. I want to apologize again to everyone who was affected by my behavior that morning at the airport, William said, his voice steady but subdued. There is no excuse for what I did, and I take full responsibility for my actions. I hope that my experience can serve as a warning to others about the importance of addressing mental health issues before they reach a crisis point. Marcus Thompson was also approached by reporters as he left the courthouse. His response was characteristically measured and professional. I'm satisfied with the court's decision, he said. Mr. Patterson has clearly worked hard to address his problems, and I hope his story can help other people who might be struggling with similar issues. Charlotte Williams declined to speak to reporters, but she had agreed to participate in a documentary about the incident that was being produced by the BBC. The documentary would explore the broader themes raised by the case, including mental health awareness, workplace stress, and the role of social media in amplifying personal crises. The documentary, which aired 3 months after the sentencing, featured interviews with all the major participants and expert commentary on the psychological and social factors that had contributed to the incident. It won several awards and was credited with increasing public awareness about mental health issues in high-pressure professions. The aviation industry had also implemented several changes as a result of the Patterson case. Manchester Airport had revised its passenger service protocols to include better training for identifying and de-escalating situations involving passengers who might be experiencing psychological distress. Other airports had adopted similar measures, and the case was now used in training programs for airline and airport personnel worldwide. Jennifer Martinez, the gate agent who had initially dealt with William's anger, had been promoted twice and was now working in airport operations management. She frequently spoke at industry conferences about customer service during crisis situations, using her experience with William as a case study in professional crisis management. The broader cultural impact of the incident continued to resonate long after the legal proceedings had concluded. The phrase Patterson syndrome had entered popular usage to describe situations where successful people had spectacular public breakdowns due to untreated stress and mental health issues. Business schools now taught case studies about the importance of work-life balance and executive mental health. William himself had found a new purpose in his advocacy work. Working with mental health organizations and business groups, he had become a sought-after speaker on the topic of executive stress and the importance of seeking help before reaching a crisis point. His talks were powerful not because he was an expert, but because he was living proof of how quickly a successful life could unravel. "I lost everything that I thought defined me," William would tell audiences. "My business, my reputation, my marriage, my social standing. But, in losing those things, I found something more valuable, the ability to be honest about my struggles and to help others avoid making the same mistakes I made." The financial consequences of his breakdown had been severe but not insurmountable. William had been forced to sell his house and most of his possessions to settle debts from Patterson Industries' collapse, but he had found work as a consultant for businesses implementing mental health support programs. The pay was a fraction of what he had earned as a CEO, but he reported being more satisfied with his work than he had been in years. As the first anniversary of the airport incident approached, all the major participants had moved forward with their lives in different ways. Marcus continued his security work with enhanced respect from colleagues and management. Charlotte had found fulfillment in her mental health advocacy work. William had rebuilt his life on a foundation of honesty and service rather than wealth and power. The incident at Gate 12 had lasted less than 2 hours, but its reverberations had continued for months and would likely persist for years to come. It had served as a catalyst for important conversations about mental health, workplace culture, and personal responsibility. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that even the most dramatic personal failures could become opportunities for growth, redemption, and service to others. The story of the chaos at the runway had ultimately become a story about human resilience and the possibility of change, even in the wake of spectacular failure. It was a reminder that behind every public meltdown was a human being struggling with problems that might not be visible from the outside, and that compassion and understanding could coexist with accountability and consequences. In a world where personal crises could become global entertainment within hours, the Patterson case had shown both the dangers and the opportunities that came with such visibility. It had ruined one man's old life while helping him build a new one based on authenticity rather than appearance, service rather than success, and healing rather than achievement. The chaos at the runway had ended, but the lessons it taught continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways that none of the original participants could have imagined.